Welcome everyone to this group, Psychoanalysis, Spirituality and Philosophy. Psychoanalysis is engaged with by a variety of people online, and you can find quite some material on psychoanalysis. What is distinct about what we are going to do is this. Number one, we are creating a academic course-like flow of material which is not available online. What is available online are thematic lectures, scholarly lectures, some of the lectures which you can appreciate once you go through the formal academic course. But the formal academic course step by step in a sequential way is not available. No university has put the recordings of the class online, or maybe if they have, I have not seen it, but it's not very common. So first thing we will do is to put online recordings of our class. So anyone who is interested in psychoanalysis can see them sequentially, lecture 1, lecture 2, session 3, session 4, and do a kind of self-study almost as though he were in a university. And this is possible at a very affordable rate, which otherwise is very costly if you go for quality education in psychoanalysis in any good university of the world. Second, psychoanalysis will take an anchor in, but will engage with spirituality and philosophy also, which will make our discussion and discourse quite original. And this will render a multifaceted flavor to our discussion. Third, we will bring in readings in the original, and we will discuss it again from an integral standpoint involving psychoanalysis, involving philosophy, spirituality, and we'll also take lastly a deeper look at non-clinical applications of psychoanalysis, which is applying psychoanalysis in areas other than for therapy, which would be areas like management, economics, sociology, history, mythology, film analysis. Fifth, the pedagogy which we will use will involve a variety of things. It will involve some lectures. It will involve readings from the original. It will involve reading of papers. It will involve some film analysis. And it will involve some case discussions if we can have some cases fully observing the confidentiality and other guidelines. So this is broadly the flow. We will start today with the building the perspective slowly. And what we will do is first we will build up the perspective, and then slowly we will get into reading the originals, then reading the research papers, reading the cases, and then creative application of theory. One of the difficulties with psychoanalysis is it is not an easy subject to understand. It is not one of those things where you can take a book or a video and self-study it through, because it requires quite an extensive commentary, quite an extensive engagement with the concept. And this is an area where I always say, Belzer had said something very interesting. He said, if it is not autobiographical enough, it is not psychoanalytic enough. And that is true. The normal tendency of the human mind is to forget the body and the mind and get lost in the satisfaction of desires. If this is not happening, it can either be something abnormal or something extraordinary or both. And this is a difference between psychoanalysis and other forms of therapy which are not based on the unconscious. In psychoanalysis, which is based on the unconscious, you can develop a grip of it only over an extended period of time if you remain inside of yourself and inside the mind of your patients. And this requires a very different kind of dedication than the type of dedication needed in a more rational therapy, be it CT, BT, CBT, DBT, and so on. So it takes years to really understand and develop a grip on psychoanalysis, but the investment is worth the reward because we are able to operate at depths which you cannot operate without this constellation of knowledge. So with this small background, let us start for today. And as others, if they join in, we can allow them to join the group. Whenever you have questions, let me know. If I go too fast, let me know. If you need more examples, let me know. So I'm sharing the screen. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see the screen? Okay. So and see Dhruval. Let's start with the part. Or let us wait for a moment for Dhruval.
Do we have to note anything down?
Yeah, I think it's better if you do.
But everything to note down everything won't be possible. So,
Uh, the recording anyway will be there online.
okay,
So if you need to refresh, you can again see those things.
okay.
Let's start. I think Dhruval has some technical issues.
Okay.
Let's start with the broad spectrum of psychological health and how it is being dealt with. Broadly, it is looked upon in two different ways. Something to do with the hardware aspect of it, the neurological aspect of it. And that goes into issues like mental retardation, partly into autism. Partly people believe ADHD also has some neurological roots. So certain aspects of psychological health are believed to be rooted in the neurology. And that goes in the domain area of neurology dealt with by a neurologist, more biologically. The other aspect of psychological health is what we deal with through the approach of psychiatry or through psychotherapy. And this usually is thought of to be difficulties which are more functional in nature. I'm using the word functional in an oversimplified way to start with, but for the moment it should be fine. So we can divide the difficulties into two. Those which are based more on the structural damage or something congenital, and those where you don't see a structural damage or something distinctly difficult with genetics, but something to do with the function. And this is what is we deal with in psychotherapy and psychiatry. Now, the first ruling out therefore is that are we dealing with a difficulty which has to do with organ damage or something to do with genetics? If that is the case, then we are looking at a different situation altogether, very biologically driven situation. But if that is not the case, then we are looking at a very psychologically driven situation. And those are the issues which are dealt with by psychiatry and by psychotherapy in different ways. Now, these difficulties we are referring to can be classified in three categories: mild, moderate, and severe, based upon the intensity of that difficulty. When it comes to severe and acute states, there is no choice but to go for psychiatric drugs. If something is sliding from moderate to severe, again there is no choice. But if something is stable in the mild or mild to moderate category, then we do have choices. And the patient's rights also come in. He has a choice what he wants to do. So that is where psychotherapy as one approach to well-being, just as psychiatry is another approach to well-being, and more often than not, both are deployed together. Not so much in the mild category, but definitely in the moderate category. If we look at psychiatry, that's a different area. We'll today focus on psychotherapy. So if there is a psychological problem, not neurological in nature, something that can be addressed in some way, either by psychiatric drugs or by psychotherapy, then that is the canvas that we play in. And in that canvas, within psychotherapy, there are various ways of doing psychotherapy. So psychotherapy is not one particular way of doing something. It is a very open artistic canvas in which variety of approaches are being used. Today, one survey says there are more than 150 different types of psychotherapy approaches used. Of this, 55 are common. Dhruval, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So one survey of the area of psychotherapy tells us that there are more than 150 different approaches in the realm of psychotherapy across the world, out of which 55 are more common and the rest are not so popularly deployed. Out of this 55, 10 to 15 major types of psychotherapies, they command almost 75% of the market. And these 10 to 5 major therapies, which command 75% of the market, can be divided into 5 categories. And these 5 categories of psychotherapy are cognitive psychotherapies, behavioral psychotherapy, depth psychology approach, philosophically oriented psychotherapies, and a combination of these 4. So this is how the arena of psychotherapy stands structured. If you look into names that fall into each of the 5 categories, you have this. If you look at those therapies which are cognitively driven, meaning thereby they center more on operating with the elemental of thought. So they are thought-focused therapies. In that realm, we have 2 very popular therapies. cognitive therapy, and rational emotive therapy. And there are many more. Two examples I have cited. In the behavioral realm, you have behavioral therapy and of course many variations of it. In depth psychology approach, we have psychoanalysis, ISTDP, Gestalt, and many forms, other forms of which we'll take up in EDT. Fourth, philosophically oriented. Okay, before we go further, in cognitive therapies, the focus essentially is on thought. The centerpiece of action is thought. In behavioral therapies, the centerpiece of action, the unit of focus is behavior. And in depth psychology, the central focus is the unconscious mind and the emotions which are playing out in the unconscious mind and the mystical phenomena which happen in the unconscious mind. The fourth category of psychotherapies is what is termed as the philosophically oriented psychotherapies. So these are very philosophically oriented approaches and they contain, you can cite two important names there, existential psychotherapy or what is called humanistic psychotherapy. Some people even use these two words together and they call it existential humanistic psychotherapy, and logotherapy. Logotherapy essentially is a search for meaning. There is a very famous book, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. This almost is like a cognitive version of Jung's individuation, logotherapy. And then the fifth category is a combination of the above four. So you can combine cognitive and behavioral approaches and create a cognitive behavioral therapy. You can combine the emotions and cognitive part and behavioral part, and we can create REBT. We can base an intensive short-term therapy on psychoanalysis and take some parts from CBT, CT, acceptance commitment therapy and create ISTDP. And based upon ISTDP, we can have further combinations in experiential dynamic therapy, EDT. EDT is a category used, a word used to categorize a full variety of therapies. So unlike CBT, REBT, EDT is not one therapy, it is a category which contains many therapies essentially based upon ISTDP, which in turn is essentially based upon psychoanalysis. So if you look at these four categories, the top 10 to 15 therapy approaches that are in practice in vogue today, you can put them into these five categories, and that covers up 75% of what is going on in therapy. So this is what we call as combination. Now there are two more words, eclectic and holistic. Eclectic means you can use two or three of these in different ways. For example, you may use psychoanalysis and ISTDP both together to do what is called ISTDP informed psychoanalysis, where you are essentially doing psychoanalysis but using some principles of ISTDP, and some sessions you might take more on the ISTDP model. So, or you may initially start with something more cognitive, right, more behavioral, and then go on to full-blown CBT or REBT. Or you may start with CBT and then move over to DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy, which combines CBT, mindfulness, and some other Eastern techniques. So these are eclectic approaches where you can have combination of combinations. What works best for the client, what kind of combination you are comfortable with, what you can handle. So these are eclectic approaches. Both schools exist. One school of thought says we should master up only one kind of technique. It is too much to ask for if we go into eclectic, because we get the worst of all the worlds. Another school says that if you deploy eclectic, you get the best of both the worlds. All depends upon how you deploy it and what are your skill levels. So both schools exist in the arena of psychotherapy. Those who are in favor of eclectic and those who are opposed to eclectic. One more important term here, holistic healing. Now, holistic healing includes healing techniques which are coming from the East. They are not essentially parts of the Western basket of psychotherapy. So in that part of the healing world, we have techniques like Reiki, pranic healing, Tai Chi, meditation techniques, and so on. Some of which have been empirically studied, and it has been found that they do have a therapeutic value. Some of them are yet to be completely studied. But patients do report that they find them these things beneficial, and although in a controlled setting, it has not been so empirically investigated, people do find that it is beneficial to do this, and they go there. And at least in the city where I live, centers which are offering these techniques, they are overflowing with clients. So this is an area where we need to invest to do a scientific empirical analysis so that everyone benefits. A good technique is not put on the sidelines, and something which is not working is not put at the center. So this is the broad scene that you have holistic healing. Another meaning of holistic healing also is to use any of the techniques which you see in the top five, the 5 categories above, and do a combination with Eastern techniques. So you can have ISTDP with pranic healing, or CBT and pranic healing, or psychoanalysis and Tai Chi, or ISTDP and certain meditative practices. Okay. So people who are trained on both the sides, they do use this kind of combinations. Most people who don't have training in the holistic side are not very convinced about that part, and they look down upon it more as a something which is working on placebo, or it is more of fooling people, it's quackery. But those who have gone on the other side and studied deeply, they do report that these are sciences in their own way, different than the classical Western science, but they are sciences in their own way. So this is the broad arena of psychotherapy world if we take a snapshot today. Any questions on this? Now, if you see in the last slide, there were 5 categories of therapies, and 10 to 15 major, 55 common, and more than 150 in vogue. So how do these things get generated? They get generated because of the elementals which constitute the psychological domain. So if we look at the canvas of psychology, if you look at the canvas of psychotherapy, what are the players we see? What are the elementals at play? The first thing we realize is there is some entity called the thought, emotion. Just look at the left hand side of the screen, which gives you the elementals who are playing in the arena of psychotherapy. You have thought, you have emotion, technically we call it affect, behavior, then we have the biochemistry or the genetic part of it. You have physical damage, to the brain or the nervous system. We have the lifestyle. We have the energy part of the body, the energy dynamic. And if you are spiritually oriented, then you might believe in karma and self journey and world journey. If you are not spiritually oriented, the last two may not form something convincing for you to consider and think over. So if you see each of the elemental that is a major player in the area of psychotherapy, when you focus upon any elemental, it gives rise to a particular school. So when you focus on the centrality of thought, out of thought, emotion, and behavior, if you look at the top three in green, these are the only three elements that Western psychotherapy currently focuses upon. It does not focus on all that which is given in the red below. So Western psychotherapy essentially today focuses on thought, emotion, and behavior. So if you, between the three, when you consider the primacy of thought in the psychic functioning, and you say out of thought, emotion, and behavior, thought is the most important. If you take that position, then you get into therapies like cognitive therapy, rational emotive therapy, and so on. If you put the primacy on emotion, affect, you get into psychoanalysis, ISTDP. When you put emphasis on the primacy of behavior, you get into behavioral therapy. When you do a combination, you get into CBT, where you place emphasis on both the cognitive aspect, which involves thought, and the behavioral aspect. So in CBT, you can see C and B. C focuses on the cognitive aspect, the thought, and B focuses on the behavioral aspect. If you are approaching in the holistic healing way, you can have combinations. For example, you can have combination of a psychotherapy technique like CBT and meditative techniques, or you can have a psychotherapy technique like DBT and combo it with homeopathy, or EDT and Ayurveda. All kind of combinations are actually being practiced by healers who are differently oriented. So it's very much an open area. Now, if you come out of Western psychotherapy, you will see people who focus on different elements also, which they believe affect psychological well-being. So psychiatry and neurology, the essential focus is on biochemistry and genes. In neurology, the focus also is on damage to the neural system, the neurological system. In Ayurveda, the focus is on lifestyle, which includes diet, yoga, the entire lifestyle. Those who focus on energy aspect and believe that focus on this aspect can bring psychological well-being, they practice Reiki, pranic healing, Tai Chi, which can be practiced individually or done in a combination with the above. Those who believe in karma, they practice spiritual techniques, and some part of pranic healing also addresses karma. Those who believe that there is something called self journey of the soul or world journey, there is some design to it. They like approaches like logotherapy, yogic approach to well-being, Ayurveda approach to well-being, and so on. So based upon which elemental you focus upon, you develop a structure of ideas that answers three things. One, how does the mind work, the model of the mind? Two, pathogenesis, how does pathology develop? And three, how do you heal? And the three are connected. Once you develop a model of the mind and decide what is central, then pathogenesis automatically comes out of it in a flavor, heavily flavored by your model of the mind. So based upon your model of the mind, your pathogenesis will acquire a flavor. And your healing method automatically will acquire a flavor from the flavor of pathogenesis. So there is a very strong link between model of the mind, pathogenesis, and the healing technique. And in some holistic schools, they consider all these parameters and try to address all these parameters from thought to self journey, all these parameters on the left through an integral approach, which includes diet, lifestyle, energy healing, psychotherapy, meditation, and so on. So it's a very wide basket of tools which are deployed. So this is something which is very much an open area, an area for creativity. And the more areas you are trained in, a more holistic approach you can deploy and more tools you can use, more tools will be available in your basket. And the first principle of healing that we all experience is this, that everything works on someone and nothing works on everyone. Whether you are a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist or a spiritual healer, everyone comes to this conclusion sooner or later, that everything works on someone and nothing works on everyone. That being the situation we are in, we need a basket full of tools and a basket full of perspectives, because we don't know what will work best, either in stand-alone flavor or in combination for any given person who is coming to us as a client. And therefore, the more perspective we have about various approaches and the more experience we have of seeing it being applied, better we are positioned to help ourselves and to help others. Any questions on this? It says we are nearing time for this Zoom session. I'll send you a new link.